Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we dig into complex policy documents and source material to find the critical insights you really need to know.
Hello.
Today, we have a really fascinating case study. It proves a point that I think can be incredibly frustrating.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
That sometimes the biggest barriers to, intellectual progress or even strategic relevance, they're not these huge policy failures.
No, not at all.
They're just small, outdated administrative rules.
It's the institutional inertia, isn't it? That quiet, dusty, bureaucratic speed bump that nobody's paid attention to for, what, decades?
Exactly, until the consequences just sort of metastasize.
And then it becomes strategically untenable. It's the difference between having a mission statement that points to the future and, well, having operational guidelines that are just stuck firmly in the past.
You've hit it right on the head. And we are diving into a detailed policy reform proposal about one of the most historically significant defense institutions in the world.
We're talking about the United Service Institution of India, or the USI.
That's right. And to ground this for everyone, the USI was founded way back in 1870. Its whole charter was, and is, to advance military knowledge and professional debate within the Indian strategic community.
It's India's premier professional military think tank. It carries immense weight.
Immense weight, immense prestige, deep historical archives.
And it plays a crucial advisory role, which makes the specific policy we're looking at today all the more surprising. You'd expect its policies to be on the cutting edge.
You would think so, but the policy under review is almost laughably mundane on the surface. It's all about library procedure.
Okay.
The USI currently restricts acceptance of book reviews for its prestigious journal to only books that are already physically held in the USI library.
So that's the crux of the problem. If the librarian hasn't finished the multi-stage process of acquiring it, processing it, cataloging the physical copy,
a process that can take months, even years,
then the USI Journal just won't publish a review of it. It doesn't matter how urgent or strategically important that book is right now.
And that, as we learned from this extensive proposal we've reviewed, is causing a major structural crisis of intellectual relevance for an institution that's supposed to be leading India's strategic discourse.
Right.
So our mission in this deep dive is to examine this formal policy proposal. It argues that this seemingly tiny library rule actually violates the USI's own foundational principles, and, well, it has to be reformed immediately if it wants to maintain its global relevance.
A strategic imperative, not just an administrative tweak.
Okay, let's unpack this. If USI's mission is so grand and forward-looking, why has this rule stuck around for so long? How did the library turn from a resource into a bottleneck?
Well, to really understand the unintended harm here, we have to look at its practical historical origins.
It didn't start out as a bad idea.
No, not at all. The rule that reviews are only accepted for books physically in the collection, it didn't start as an intellectual barrier. The sources suggest it likely came from just basic, pragmatic, print-based record keeping.
Which, back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when information was all print, that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. The logic was all about verifiability and accessibility. I mean, if you published a review in the journal, you had a professional obligation to make sure that book is on the shelf.
So other members or researchers could go find it, read the source material, check your critique.
Exactly. It was a sound internal control mechanism for its time.
A sound administrative safeguard for a print-only world. But you fast forward to the digital age.
And the proposal argues that this historical safeguard has become, and this is a direct quote, a structural barrier to scholarly breadth and intellectual agility.
Right. It basically turns the entire library acquisition system from a responsive resource into, an authoritative bottleneck for any current strategic debate.
Precisely. The policy forces the intellectual agenda to move at the speed of bureaucracy and procurement. And the proposal meticulously details 4 key ways this policy actively contradicts the USI's own mission.
Okay, let's spend some time on these contradictions. Let's start with the first one. Intellectual breadth versus institutional narrowness.
The contradiction here is just. It's palpable. You look at the USI's charter, which demands broad inquiry and curiosity.
Right, engagement with all military knowledge.
And then you compare that to how this policy is executed. By limiting reviews strictly to what's already in its collection, the USI is artificially narrowing its own intellectual horizons.
They're actively shutting the door on emerging global works that are crucial right now just because the physical acquisition process hasn't caught up.
And we're not talking about, obscure history books here. The proposal specifically calls out frontline strategic subjects that are being excluded or severely delayed.
Like what?
Things like artificial intelligence and its military applications, hybrid warfare, cognitive security, which is massive right now, and the whole field of Indo-Pacific strategy. These are the dynamic, fast-moving areas where you need thought leadership.
And this leads to a really critical phrase from the source material, doesn't it? It says the policy inadvertently rewards archival completeness over intellectual contemporaneity.
Yes, and think about what that phrase really means. The institution is prioritizing making sure the paper record is perfectly cataloged, in order, over engaging immediately with the strategic realities of today.
That is a fundamentally backward-looking stance for a strategic institution. Their job is to look over the horizon.
Exactly. It's a
Right.
critical distinction. If your priority is the archive, you're a museum. If your priority is the intellectual debate, you're a think tank. This rule is pushing the USI toward being a museum.
Which brings us to the second contradiction, and this one hits really close to home for their primary audience: professional military education, or PME, standards.
PME is the bedrock of advanced military professionalism across the globe.
Right. Its whole purpose is to cultivate critical thinking, intellectual agility, the ability to process diverse information quickly.
And the book review, that structured, critical assessment of new thought, is a foundational tool. Almost every major military institution uses it to teach critical analysis and writing.
But the USI policy, by contrast, throws up a barrier that, as the proposal says, discourages proactive engagement with new military literature.
It actively punishes proactive curiosity. Yeah. Imagine you're a young major. You just got back from a specialized course where you found a revolutionary new ebook on cyber doctrine.
Something cutting edge, published by maybe a non-traditional press?
Right. You read it over the weekend, you write a rigorous critique, you submit it to the USI Journal, excited to contribute to the national conversation.
Then what happens?
You're told, thank you for your excellent work, but the physical copy of this ebook hasn't been acquired and cataloged yet, so we can't publish your review.
That is just great. It's how you kill enthusiasm and future scholarship in one single move.
Precisely. And the strategic risk described here is massive for any institution guiding national defense. They risk creating what the sources forcefully call institutional echo chambers.
I get the term echo chamber in general, but for a defense organization, what's the real danger there? Is it just missing a few books, or does this bias actively warp their advice to the government?
It's definitely the latter, and the warping can be profound. An echo chamber here means the discourse is limited to only what the institution has already approved, acquired, or generally agrees with.
So they miss the fringe ideas that eventually become mainstream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine an officer is reading a radical new Chinese monograph on cognitive warfare, or a Russian treatise on information ops books that are often hard to acquire quickly.
Right.
The USI fails to even process the strategic threat because its internal mechanism prevents the crucial conversation from even starting until the book is a year old. They're fostering a culture that prioritizes internal consensus over external awareness.
And that inward-looking view could absolutely lead to strategic blindness.
Especially during periods of rapid doctrinal change, like right now.
Okay, so that shifts this whole problem from a library issue to a strategic intelligence issue, which I imagine fundamentally affects the USI's global standing.
It does, and that's the third contradiction. Institutional reputation and outreach.
The USI operates in a global marketplace of ideas.
It does. As India's premier military think tank, its publications are watched by international peers RUSI in the UK, RAND, the U.S. Army War College.
And when the USI Journal is seen reviewing material that is 6, 12, maybe 18 months behind the global discussion,
the policy projects an image of institutional insularity.
that image is devastating when strategic competition requires immediate outward intellectual reach.
And there's a huge practical consequence for contributors, too. It forces officers, analysts, anyone who wants to contribute, to wait months or years for a book to be acquired.
Just because of the bureaucracy of purchasing and cataloging physical items, especially from overseas.
Right. And this delay doesn't just annoy the contributor, it fundamentally reduces the intellectual impact of the journal itself.
How so?
Well, if a book on integrating command structures comes out today, and a contributor has a brilliant, timely review ready next week, waiting a year for the acquisition process means that when it's finally published, the review is reactive.
It's not thought-leading anymore, it's historical commentary.
Exactly. The USI Journal loses its edge, its credibility, as a timely source of strategic thought, and policymakers are forced to look elsewhere for faster, fresher analysis. Okay, and the fourth contradiction. This one's about generational inclusivity, equity, and accessibility. It sounds like this policy unintentionally creates a kind of elitist structure.
It creates a huge digital disconnect. That's the source of the exclusion. Younger officers, scholars, civilian researchers, they often access new literature instantly via digital platforms.
E-books, digital monographs, online reports.
They're often the ones most aware of the true cutting edge of military literature.
But if they rely on those digital formats, which are faster, cheaper, and more sustainable, they are automatically excluded from the formal review process.
Just because the title isn't physically on shelf in the library in Delhi?
Correct.
The proposal notes that preventing them from reviewing these works silences valuable and diverse voices.
So it perpetuates a structure that favors people who work primarily with physical print, or those who are senior enough to demand a book get procured immediately, or those within the Delhi academic circle who can physically access the shelves. It actively contradicts the USI's mission to advance professional education among all ranks and scholars, no matter where they're posted or what medium they prefer.
It's an administrative rule that stifles democratic participation in strategic thought. So we have a clear diagnosis here. A policy built on 19th century principles is actively suppressing 21st century thought, weakening PME, hurting global reputation, and excluding diverse voices. That's a powerful indictment.
It is. And the USI is clearly aware that this isn't standard practice internationally.
Yeah.
Which leads us perfectly into the next section, the comparative analysis.
Right, where they use hard data to show just how far out of step USI is with its global peers.
What's fascinating here is just how starkly the USI policy contrasts with those peers. The sources give us a really clinical comparative analysis, and the conclusion is striking.
Which is?
Leading institutions prioritize relevance, strategic value, and timeliness.
While USI prioritizes physical availability and archival convenience.
Exactly. This is the core conceptual failure, what the source material calls the inversion of priorities.
It uses that exact language, inversion of priorities, because it's so precise.
It is. It transforms what should be an intellectual gateway into an administrative gatekeeper. USI is using internal administrative rules to veto intellectual value.
A posture that's just incompatible with fostering independent, forward-looking military thought.
Especially in a rapidly changing world.
So to really understand the scope of this, let's look at the specific data points in that comparison. Let's start with the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, in the UK, one of the oldest and most respected defense think tanks.
RUSI's policy is simple and entirely merit-based. They'll accept any submission, digital or print, of a relevant new publication.
So whether the physical library copy exists yet is optional, a secondary concern.
Completely. Their inclusion criterion is purely topical relevance. They ask one question: does this book matter right now? Is it relevant to the ongoing debate?
And the strategic outcome of that policy.
The outcome is timely, pluralistic, immediate debate. When major events happen, a new technology, a new doctrine, a conflict, RUSI publishes near instantaneous critiques and reviews. This keeps them at the absolute forefront.
So their library serves their scholarship, not the other way around.
Yes. High-value reviewed works are acquired quickly. Their scholarship doesn't wait for the library to catch up. They are responsive. That's key to maintaining influence.
And what about across the Atlantic? The U.S. Army War College Strategic Studies Institute, or SSI.
They seem to use the review process as an active component of PME.
How so?
SSI and the National Defense University Press, they operate on open submission reviews. Their criterion is strategic relevance and direct relevance to current doctrine and PME objectives.
Any outcome there?
Continuous, robust engagement with new thought. And importantly, it boosts officer authorship.
Yeah.
They're actively using the review process not just to vet books, but as a formal PME tool to develop the critical thinking and writing skills of their officers.
So they're training their workforce by removing these administrative barriers.
Exactly. NDU Press, specifically, is noted for reviewing cutting-edge works, including digital monographs. Their editorial structure is built for the digital age. Their criteria are relevance and originality. They're looking for new, valuable ideas wherever they appear.
Okay, now let's contrast all of that with the USI's current policy. The inclusion criterion is listed as what?
Archival convenience, physical availability.
And the outcome, as we've established, is restricted intellectual diversity, limits on innovation, and huge timeliness issues. The source material really doesn't mince words here.
No, the comparison shows USI's policy is a functional anachronism. Where its peers measure scholarly value by insight and merit, USI measures it by shelf location.
And that distinction is vital. It means USI is systematically ignoring the fastest-moving, most challenging strategic literature.
The very works often published digitally, or by foreign presses, or by non-traditional authors, simply because they're bureaucratically inconvenient to acquire.
Here's where it gets really interesting, moving beyond the comparison. What are the projected, concrete consequences if they just maintain this stance? The source material details 5 specific risks.
Right. Risks that will continue to erode the USI's influence and strategic utility.
So what's the first and most immediate risk?
Diminished relevance. If the policy remains, the USI Journal, instead of leading the discussion, will just perpetually lag behind.
And policymakers need real-time advice.
Of course, if the USI is commenting on books months after they've already influenced policy debates in Washington or London, it signals that the USI isn't an essential, timely resource. That lack of timeliness directly affects their mandate to advise.
Okay, and the second consequence. It hits the workforce directly.
Reduced scholarly participation, the delay and the hurdles, they create huge disincentives for contributions from key intellectual groups.
Especially young officers in PME programs, civilian researchers.
And scholars operating outside the capital, Delhi. If the barrier to entry is waiting for a slow procurement process, they just won't bother. They'll submit their work to more responsive platforms.
And that starves the USI of the fresh, diverse perspectives it needs.
It weakens the pipeline of future thinkers.
Third, this institutional insularity we talked about. It becomes a permanent, self-inflicted condition.
The USI will project an image of being closed off from global debate, reviewing only the books it already has, which means its intellectual sphere is just shrinking year by year.
It's a matter of prestige and soft power.
It is. While RUSI and SSI project intellectual openness, showing they can engage with every corner of strategic thought, USI risks appearing static and closed. This seriously undermines their credibility, especially as India asserts a major global role.
The fourth risk is a direct PME failure.
Lost PME opportunity. The policy blocks a key developmental channel for junior officers. The sources are clear. The book review is the most accessible gateway for junior personnel to develop sophisticated critical analysis skills.
And blocking this channel limits their ability to engage critically with new global works.
It undermines the very PME goals that prioritize critical thinking and doctrinal curiosity. You're telling your most curious minds to just wait.
And finally, the irony of the original administrative failure.
Administrative inefficiency. The current rule says books must be purchased before reviews justify their relevance. This is a complete waste of effort and public funds.
The review process, if it were modernized, should be the filter for acquisition.
It should ensure the library buys the works that the strategic community has already validated as significant. Instead, the USI acquires first, often blindly, and then reviews. It's functionally inefficient.
So, the status quo means USI's internal process actively undermines its ability to execute its charter and reduces its strategic utility, all while wasting resources.
It's clear this policy needs not just a revision, but a wholesale strategic replacement.
And that's exactly what the proposal delivers. A detailed blueprint for modernization that replaces that convenience filter with a strategic one. The core objective here seems really clear. Realign their publication practices with the USI, mission continuous learning, intellectual openness, professional debate.
This is so much more than an administrative memo. It's a strategic repositioning. It's about making sure the USI is fit for purpose in the 21st century.
And the key strategic shift is replacing the requirement of physical location with a requirement of
What? Intellectual merit.
intellectual merit and provable existence. They need a new rule that maintains quality control and scholarly rigor without relying on the physical catalog.
Okay, and the proposed solution is captured in one definitive statement. Let's quote the proposed policy statement in full from the source material.
Please.
The USI shall accept book reviews of any publication relevant to national security, defense studies, strategic affairs, or military thought, irrespective of whether the book is currently held in the USI library, subject to verification of authenticity and relevance.
And that last phrase, subject to verification of authenticity and relevance, that is the crucial new gatekeeper.
So they're not just throwing the doors open to anything. No, not at all. They're replacing an archival filter, is it on the shelf, with a stringent scholarly filter. Is the book real? Is it strategically important? This immediately addresses the core concerns of the original rule, while embracing intellectual breadth.
Okay, but in an institution that has operated under the old rule for decades, this kind of transition needs a very structured approach to avoid chaos.
It does. And the source provides a detailed implementation framework, starting with a rapid 60-day sprint.
So what's the first thing that needs to happen?
The initial phase is all editorial and informational. Within 30 days of the Council approving this, the editor-in-chief and the director of studies must formally amend the editorial guidelines of the USI Journal.
That's the official notification to the whole community that the policy has changed.
Exactly. It immediately lifts the restriction and signals USI's commitment to being contemporary.
But the real structural change happens next, within 60 days. That's the new quality control mechanism.
Yes, the Book Review Vetting Committee, or BRVC. This committee will be the new hub of quality assurance. It's responsible for verifying the credentials, existence, and relevance of any new, non-held titles.
And the proposal specifies its composition.
It does. It has to be rigorous. A senior editor for intellectual focus, the librarian for authenticity and procurement synchronization, and rotating subject experts for domain knowledge.
The rotating subject experts part sounds critical. It ensures that a book on, say, AI ethics is vetted by someone who actually understands the field.
Absolutely. The BRVC's mandate is sophisticated. They have to quickly assess, is the publisher credible? Is the reviewer qualified? And most importantly, does the book itself make a substantive contribution to national security discourse?
So it moves the filtering function from a passive shelf check to an active intellectual judgment.
Precisely.
And crucially, the plan accounts for the digital age, which was the source of the original problem. How does the proposal address the digital integration part?
The main hurdle is verifying authenticity when the work isn't physical. So the plan specifically allows reviewers to submit digital or authenticated copies or extracts.
Things like ebooks, high-res digital chapters, scanned title pages.
Or even proof of purchase receipts for the BRVC's verification. This is essential for ensuring authenticity without demanding a physical hardbound copy.
And I imagine this protocol has to include robust security measures.
Of course, to prevent submission of pirated material or unauthenticated drafts, it's about maintaining scholarly integrity, even in a digital format.
That's smart. They're using technology to authenticate the source without being reliant on physical inventory. But this brings us back to the original administrative concern, archival continuity. If a fantastic book is reviewed and published, how does the library make sure it eventually gets acquired for future researchers?
This is handled by a really elegant mechanism called acquisition synchronization. The librarian is mandated to maintain a specific digital tracking system.
The reviewed but not yet held digital register.
The RBJNH register, yes. And this register serves two crucial functions. First, it tracks the scholarship published on external works, making the institution aware of all the high-quality intellectual debates it's hosting.
And second,
And most importantly, it automatically queues those high-quality titles, the ones that have already been validated by a USI review and the BRVC for library procurement.
So it uses intellectual validation and peer review to drive administrative action. It completely reverses the old priority.
Yes. The review process becomes the first stage of acquisition, guaranteeing that the best, most strategically relevant books are purchased.
That makes the administrative process truly responsive to the intellectual needs of the institution. The library is built around the best scholarship rather than the other way around.
And on top of that, the plan includes essential supporting measures to encourage community adoption and ensure transparency.
Which is key to overcoming institutional resistance.
It is. So they recommend things like an outreach incentive.
Like formally recognizing reviewers who introduce new material, especially those in the marginalized groups we talked about.
Correct. Recognizing them through editorial mentions, certificates, maybe even prizes for introducing high-quality external works. This actively encourages the entire strategic community, especially junior officers, to broaden USI's intellectual scope and feel valued for it.
And they also mandate transparency and outreach to show this isn't just a cosmetic change.
Yes. The USI must publicly post the updated review guidelines and acquisition logs on their website. Complete transparency. They also recommend hosting quarterly book review colloquia.
Transforming the submission process into a public intellectual event.
Exactly. Cementing the USI's role as a living forum for strategic thought. The entire framework is designed to rapidly transition USI from an archives-focused institution to a proactively engaging intellectual forum, all within that proposed 60-day deadline.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
this reform is really a statement about institutional priorities.
It is. The sources frame this not as a mere procedural fix, but as a deliberate, necessary effort to better align operational policy with USI's core institutional values.
Let's map out that realignment. How does it move from the restrictive past toward a proactive future?
Okay, so in terms of intellectual openness, the old policy was restrictive and inward-looking.
And the revised policy is now explicitly inclusive and outward engaging. It opens the doors to global thought leadership.
For professional development, the old rule meant passive consumption. You were limited to existing holdings.
The new policy fosters active critical evaluation. It expands PME engagement by requiring officers to assess cutting-edge material, not just read what's available.
The measure of scholarly rigor also shifts significantly. The old policy was focused on archival compliance. The revised policy shifts the focus entirely to strategic relevance and analytical depth.
So the journal is judged by the quality of its insight, not the completeness of its shelves.
Right. And most critically, for a national think tank, the shift in global relevance moves the institution from being reactive waiting for books to arrive to being proactive and responsive to emerging thought. It puts them on par with RUSI and the U.S. Army War College.
And all these realignments, they lead to a clear set of expected positive outcomes.
Yes, which serve as the final, compelling strategic rationale for the reform.
So first, they anticipate enhanced intellectual vitality and diversity. By removing the bottleneck and injecting new perspectives, the quality of strategic discussion should improve instantly.
Second, and this is vital for longevity, they expect greater participation from the very groups that were previously marginalized.
Gender officers, civilian strategists, scholars from a wider geographic base. It democratizes the USI's intellectual reach.
The third, it strengthens institutional reputation and prestige, both nationally and internationally. By projecting an image of openness and contemporaneity, USI aligns itself with its global peers.
And finally, the implementation plan ensures the core administrative goal isn't lost.
That's right. The digital library synchronization ensures both scholarly relevance and eventual archival completeness. It's a system where intellectual merit dictates administrative action. You get the best of both worlds.
This whole effort then culminates in a formal step, the Council resolution.
Yes. The sources provide a detailed draft of a resolution, and this is critical because it moves the policy out of the domain of just an administrative memo and elevates it to a formal institutional mandate.
So it has real teeth.
It does. Its preamble is significant. It acknowledges the limitations of the current rule and explicitly notes the success of the inclusive policies of peer international institutions. It provides the justification for change.
And its key provisions.
It formally repeals the existing restriction and adopts the new inclusive policy wording. It also empowers the implementation authority, the director, the editor-in-chief, the librarian, to establish the BRVC and update the guidelines within that tight 30 to 60-day window.
It ensures speed and accountability.
And critically, it includes a robust evaluation clause. The effectiveness of the revised policy has to be reviewed after 1 year.
So it ensures the new system remains accountable to its intended outcomes and can be modified. It's not just trading one rigid rule for another.
Exactly. It demonstrates institutional flexibility.
So what does this all mean? The proposal seems to frame this reform not as an optional correction, but as a strategic necessity.
That necessity is driven by the sheer pace of doctrinal evolution today. AI, cyber, hybrid warfare, transdomain security challenges. These issues don't wait for a book to be bound and shipped overseas.
The policy has to reflect the external purpose, the immediate and unconstrained pursuit of knowledge.
Right. If USI is to sustain its role as the intellectual conscience of India's defense community, its internal mechanisms can't impede its engagement with the future of warfare.
By modernizing this policy, USI reaffirms its founding purpose, to serve as a living, breathing forum for the exchange of ideas.
And the cultivation of analytical thinking in an age where the next great strategic threat might first appear in a digital monograph from a non-traditional press, not a hardbound library copy from 5 years ago.
Oh.
They're shifting from being guardians of the past to being navigators of the future.
So we started by looking at a tiny administrative hurdle, the library-held restriction, and we realized through this deep dive that it was functioning as a major self-inflicted strategic barrier.
It is.
We've traced the intellectual path from that outdated administrative safeguard, which was physical location, to a modern strategic filter, which is authenticity and relevance.
It's a really compelling case study because it shows how strategic institutions, even those with deep history and powerful mandates, can be unknowingly constrained by historical red tape.
Mm.
The USI had all the resources, all the talent.
But its intellectual agility was stalled by a library rule that had outlived its usefulness by 50 years. And for you, the learner, understanding this bureaucratic fight shows exactly how institutional inertia can stall strategic thought, even in the most critical areas like national security.
Yeah.
Policy modernization, even at the most granular level, is often the single most important key to maintaining intellectual leadership and ensuring your organization isn't, rewarding archival completeness over intellectual contemporaneity.
Indeed. The source material notes that the USI has for over 150 years embodied the intellectual conscience of India's defense community. This reform seeks to ensure that USI remains a living forum for the exchange of ideas.
A living forum.
Which raises an important question for you to consider.
Yeah.
How many other powerful institutions, maybe even in your own field tech, finance, education anchored in tradition, are currently held back not by a lack of resources, but by an outdated definition of what constitutes legitimate knowledge or legitimate participation, just waiting for their own council resolution to catch up with the digital age? What is the unseen administrative bottleneck stifling creativity in your own sphere?